Good morning, everyone. Please join me for number 1021, Lean on Me. Please stand.
Thank you. What a great way to start. Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal, religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and we're glad to have you with us. UUCS is a very welcoming congregation, and we appreciate your unique experiences, backgrounds, beliefs, and lifestyles. If you're one of our longtime members, or if you've been here a short time, or if you're joining us today for the very first time, we're so glad that you're with us. We're also very grateful for those of you who are streaming our service today. We know there are many of you. And I just wanted to put a little shout out in the second service for our first service Zoomers who are not with us now. But I wanted to tell you that last week I was traveling and I wasn't able to, obviously, to attend in person and sit in my seat, which is the second row back and the second seat in, usually, first service, unless Peggy's in there. So I attended on Zoom, and it was such a wonderful experience. So if you are ever out of the city for any reason and you can't bring your bottom to sit in a chair here in the sanctuary, do take the opportunity to meet the folks who attend on Zoom. And I'll give you one little secret about that. They listen to the entire last song that Maura plays on the piano that we never do. We forget to do that. So they listen to the whole beautiful music, and then they all get an opportunity. They all speak to each other in their coffee hour after the service. So I just wanted to give that little shout out. That is a wonderful way to attend church if you're not able to attend here in person. Okay, now we'll get to greet each other in just a minute, but before we do that, It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Joe King. During the sermon today, Joe is going to be sharing his thoughts on a concern he's held for a long time, but certainly since 2016, the growing divisions in our country and our struggle to have meaningful conversations across those divides. A little about Joe's background. Raised in a working-class family with a carpenter father, Joe learned early on how to navigate transitions, attending 4 different high schools before graduating from Linfield College in Oregon. He later moved to rural Kentucky as an intern in the Teacher Corps before returning to Washington to begin a successful political career. In 1980, he was elected to the Washington State Legislature, and by 1987, he served as Speaker of the House. After an impressive career, Joe retired from politics in 1992 following a run for governor. Today, Joe will offer his hopeful perspective on America's future, looking beyond political labels and encouraging us to see each other as more than just red or blue. Joe and his wife, Kelsey, are both retired and members of UUCS. You can usually find them here at our second service until that darn Florida sunshine beckons them south for the winter. So please join me in warmly welcoming Joe King. Okay, now let's take a few moments to greet one another, and be sure you take an opportunity to say hello to someone you haven't met yet. Thank you. We'll have more time to greet one another and share our stories during our social hour after the service. Ellen's got the coffee going, and there's always time for some great conversation after that. We now turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. Our opening reflection this morning is from author and academic Michael Austin. Before I read this passage from his book, We Must Not Be Enemies, Restoring America's Civic Tradition, I thought it fair to share his disclaimer and personal acknowledgement that his words are aspirational and not a description of how he actually engages in every discussion as much as he wishes to. Perhaps we can consider these words aspirational for our own attitudes and actions, however imperfectly we may put them into practice. When people say things that we find offensive, civic charity asks that we resist the urge to attribute to immorality or prejudice views that can be equally well explained by other motives. It asks us to give the benefit of doubts, the assumption of goodwill, and the gift of attention. When people say things that we agree with or respond thoughtfully to our arguments, we acknowledge that they have done so. We compliment where we can do so honestly, and we praise whatever we can legitimately find praiseworthy in their beliefs and their actions. When we argue with a forgiving affection, we recognize that people are often carried away by passions when discussing things of great importance to them. We overlook slights and insults and decline to respond in kind. We apologize when we get something wrong or when we hurt someone's feelings, and we allow others to apologize to us when they do the same. When people don't apologize, we still don't hold grudges or hurt them intentionally, even if we feel that they have intentionally hurt us. If somebody is abusive or obnoxious, we may decline to participate in further conversation, but we don't retaliate to attempt to make them suffer. And we try really hard not to give in to the overwhelming feeling that arguments must be won and opponents destroyed if we want to protect our own status and sense of worth. We never forget that our opponents are human beings who possess innate dignity and fellow citizens who deserve respect.
Please stand, join me for number 123 in your hymnal, Spirit of Life.
We will now kindle our candles of care. Joe. Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our minds and hearts, and who we want to wrap in our love and care. Today, as we have for some time, we light a candle for those caught in the unjust conflicts in Ukraine, Russia, Israel, and Palestine. May our thoughts and care extend to all innocent lives affected by these wars. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here and here in our hearts and minds this morning. You're welcome to say their names aloud as you are willing. Those named aloud, and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world at this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. Today is the third Sunday of the month, and as is our custom, we're having a special collection during our offertory for one of our community partners chosen for support by our social justice team. Contributions so designated today will go to Transitions, a local nonprofit working to end poverty and homelessness for women and children in Spokane. They fulfill their mission by operating 6 programs designed to provide transitional and permanent housing, childcare, early childhood education, vocational training, and friendly daytime safe spaces. This mission cannot be carried out without the support of our whole Spokane community, including those of us here and as members and friends of UUCS, many who have been longtime supporters of Transition, volunteers, and employees of this important organization. Executive Director Sarah Lickfold is here with us today. And you want to wave? Yep. And she will be available after the service in the back in the Friendship Hall at the Social Justice table to provide additional information and answer any questions. If you feel so moved to contribute, you'll find an envelope in your order of service. No need to seal it, as we do reuse them each month. And contributions can also be made online on our website, where there will be a space to indicate that your donation is for our special collection to Transitions. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
I'd like to invite any children to come forward for our time for all ages. Come on down. And thank you to the choir for setting up our story, which is called The Tale of the Tree and the Wind. It's a beautiful backdrop to today's story. All right. Once upon a time. That's how most stories begin, isn't it? Once upon a time, in a wide and beautiful meadow, stood a great and mighty tree. This tree had been there for as long as anyone could remember. Its roots were deep, and its branches provided shade and shelter to all who came by. The tree was proud of its history, believing that its strength and stability kept the meadow safe. Across the meadow was a lively wind. The wind was always on the move, bringing change wherever it went. It carried new ideas, fresh scents, and the seeds of growth from faraway lands. The wind was proud of how it brought life and growth to the land, always looking ahead to the future. The tree and the wind were friendly, but they often disagreed. The tree would say, "You blow through here too quickly, always stirring things up. Can't you see the meadow is perfect just the way it is?" And the wind would reply, "But the world is changing. New ideas and ways of doing things are what keep the meadow alive. We have to adapt." One day, trouble came to the meadow in the form of a scorching heat wave. The sun blazed down relentlessly, drying up the grass, and the animals began to suffer. The tree stood tall and strong as ever, but it couldn't stop the sun from heating up everything below. The wind tried to help, blowing cooler air into the meadow, but it wasn't enough to beat back the heat. The tree, worried for the meadow and those who lived there, finally spoke up. "I can't shade the whole meadow. The sun is too powerful, and I can't stretch myself any further." The wind, feeling helpless, answered, "And I can't cool it down enough on my own. No matter how much I blow, the heat keeps coming back. What can we do?" They both thought for a while, and finally the tree had an idea. "What if you carry my seeds to new places in the meadow, places that need more shade? With more trees like me, we could provide shelter to more of the animals." The wind paused, considering this. "And while I spread your seeds, I can also bring some moisture from the nearby river to help those seedlings grow. That way, the new trees will be strong enough to offer shade and cool the meadow." Together, they set to work. The wind gently carried the tree's seeds to every corner of the meadow and brought cool air and moisture from the river. Soon, new saplings began to sprout all over the meadow, and as the saplings grew, each one offered a bit more shade, and the meadow became cooler, and the animals found shelter from the blazing sun. From that day on, the tree and the wind worked together. The tree provided roots and stability, and the wind brought new ideas and progress. They learned that they didn't have to agree on everything, but by working together, they could protect and grow the meadow in ways that neither could do alone. Now, please join me in singing our children out to Children's Chapel.
As we move into a time of meditation, you're invited to find a comfortable, receptive position. Close your eyes if you wish. Take a few deeper breaths and reflect on these words from author Michael Austin. Charitable engagement does not always change people's hearts and minds, but the number of times it has done so is not zero, which gives charity a better track record than anger, contempt, and derision. Ultimately, though, mature and thoughtful people do not allow the way other people treat them to determine how they treat other people. When we do this, we surrender an enormous amount of power to people who do not wish us well.
Greetings, welcome. Nice to see so many friends, family here. You'll hear more about my family in my remarks here. Special recognition for Council Chair Betsy. Thank you, Betsy, for coming out here. I'm blessed today. First service, I had one of my brother-in-laws here. Second service, I have another brother-in-law here, my brother-in-law, Gil. I'm going to embarrass him because several years ago, maybe back as 2016, Gil, who's a pretty liberal guy, he's got a few quirks, but he's a pretty liberal guy. But we were talking about our political opponents, and he opined, I think we're just going to have to shoot all the brown shirts. I realized some people don't recognize the term brown shirts. They were the Hitler street thugs that helped bring him to power. The Mussolini had the black shirts. So I always listened to Gil, but shooting him our political opponents seemed a little bit extreme to me. But this problem of what to do with and how to think about more importantly, how we relate to our political opponents has really haunted me. I've really wanted to speak on this issue for the last several years, so I thought it would be easy to prepare my remarks on this. That wasn't the case. I've really struggled to put remarks together because this is not easy stuff that we're talking about. During my struggles, a friend of mine suggested that I read a book by Monica Guzman called I Never Thought of It This Way, which was an enormous help. The book was enough of a help that I'm afraid I haven't always given her credit in my remarks here. It's for some of her ideas. But in spite of the help I got from this book, at the end of the day, I'm afraid I'm going to have to settle for posing questions to you, many of which I can't answer. Really, what do we make of people who believe, or who at least we think believe, with the former president, that most immigrants are thieves and rapists? What do we do with people? How do we relate to people that think that our electoral system is corrupt? What do we make of people who applaud when they see a former president denigrate women with gross references to their anatomy? How indeed do we relate when so many of their beliefs or their perceived beliefs are in direct conflicts with our own deeply held values? I think you can understand why I've struggled. This is actually a challenge not just for me, but for all of us. I've decided to break my comments into two sections. Why do we need to relate, and how do we go about relating? The easiest part is the first part, why we should relate, and we can start there with our first UU principle. We believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We don't believe in the inherent worth and dignity of people who only agree with us. We believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Enough said. Come on. Why can't we simply dismiss opposing views as coming from kooks and malcontents and deplorables, if you will? And truthfully, several of us probably thought that Hillary made sense. To simply dismiss others with opposite, even abhorrent views leads to autocracy. It assumes that we have all the answers. Autocracies breed extremism. Autocracies don't just develop from the right. Remember Pol Pot and Mao and Stalin, all from the left. Autocracies can come when dissent is stamped out. With no meaningful pushback, with no critics who are left, with no impactful opposition, the autocrat can and will adopt more and more extreme positions. We don't have to look any further on this than our own church. If the members of this church can't understand what it's like to have our views dismissed or shouted down, we don't get the problem. To not relate or to not engage with different points of view denies us the value of different perspective. I must confess that when I was working in the legislature, I didn't start working on a new policy by first trying to include the view of the minority. It wasn't the first thing I thought of. But I did learn over time, when the minority view was included, that we wrote better legislation. I was identified with the passage of the state's growth management legislation. We had worked on this for 3 years in a row, and it came up to the end of another session, and we failed to have enough votes to pass the bill. The governor, after the session was over, proposed calling us back into special session to deal with this issue. I was initially disdainful of the idea, indignantly asking what on earth the governor was going to do to help us get agreement. Turns out that he was going to have us do something pretty special. Talk to the Republicans. What a novel idea. So we reluctantly went to the table with 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. At the table was Republican House Leader Clyde Ballard, a conservative, a very principled legislator. Clyde didn't think that what we were doing made much sense at all. He just thought it wasn't the role of government. However, he was very constructive at the table. He offered positive suggestions. He talked about how we could make this more palatable to the minority party. In essence, he was a positive force. Now, when the measure came for a vote, Clyde still voted no, which was fine. But he had his positive input. The bill passed with a bipartisan support, and the bill has pretty much stood the test of time. Occasionally, our political opposites have something meaningful to say. Let me take kind of a painful example here. Let's talk about Elon Musk. If ever there was a guy who was easy for us to despise, it would be Elon. It certainly looks like he has all the political wisdom in the best sense of a college sophomore who has the world all figured out and doesn't mind sharing this with everybody. It's hard sometimes not to assume that his newfound political wisdom is not filled with self-interest. And maybe they are. But he's a guy, at the same time, who had the vision to imagine a different future, a vision championed by many of us, a future not as dependent upon fossil fuels. Electric cars and solar panels are light years ahead because of him. We can at least imagine what affordable space travel might be. If Elon Musk had been dismissed as a weirdo kook, we wouldn't have made progress on some issues we believe in. A final example of why we need to relate, if I haven't upset you enough already, would be our response to COVID. I would suggest that the response from the left sometimes bordered on hysteria. Yes, we were guided by science. That is, when science was available to answer the questions. But hindsight is showing that we certainly didn't have all of the answers. That's understandable. I mean, we hadn't faced anything like this, this kind of worldwide epidemic. So it's understandable we didn't have all the answers. But our response to any suggestions that challenged the orthodoxy was to shout them down, to shun, to become righteously indignant. You know, science truthfully came up a little short factoring in the economic hardship came with extended shutdowns. Science really didn't exist to predict the impact on schools. Children shut out of schools for 2 years. Let me be clear. I'm not criticizing our public health officials. I think they made a valiant effort. What I am criticizing is our inability, our unwillingness to hear of any opposition. So that's the easy part of our message here today, as we turn to how we should relate and why is it so strong. I've told you that I've really struggled with this message. It's been painful to put together. The reason, there's a name for why it's painful. It's called cognitive dissonance. All of you, I think, have heard this phrase. It is difficult and painful for us to hold contradictory views in our brain. It makes us uncomfortable. So when we're facing this cognitive dissonance, we turn to another fancy term. We all have confirmation bias. That means we turn to sources that agree with our own values, that are comfortable for us to hear. They're not uncomfortable like those other guys' views. They're comfortable. And we live in a world where we can increasingly sort ourselves out into these little silos where we really hear what we want to hear. First part of relating to our political opposites is to learn to listen. And try to listen with humbleness. Listening is not just about being quiet when our partner is speaking. Effective listening is a way of making the other person feel heard. How much of our frustration with people who don't share our beliefs is that they just don't seem to hear us? Listening is a form of respect. It is saying that you are important enough for me to try to understand what you're saying. It's a form of validation. This kind of listening does not mean you are agreeing with your conversational partner, but just that you think they are important enough to be worthy of your time. The person that should be giving this message today is my wife, Kelsey, who has helped me by editing and adding thoughts. Her professional background was facilitating groups wrestling with very difficult public policy issues. She was a renowned practitioner in the Northwest and has successfully facilitated discussion on major policy issues for years. One of my favorite stories she tells involves getting the two sides of an intractable problem to listen to one another. The Columbia River Gorge is an awe-inspiring place and has been signaled out by National Geographic as one of the world's most beautiful places. Environmentalists, mostly from Portland, felt the scenic beauty of the gorge was being threatened by development. They proposed creating a national scenic area to protect the gorge. Naturally enough, the residents of the gorge didn't feel that they needed protecting by the federal government. They were much more likely to think that they needed protection from the federal government. So Kelsey was called in to convene a group of environmentalists, loggers, fishermen, local governments, and tribes to reach a common understanding. Emotions were running extremely high. In fact, the first rule that Kelsey had to institute was no guns were allowed at the table. I'd been up speaking to those groups. It was the only time I'd ever had a state patrol escort. So she started, after she made it clear that no guns were allowed, she had everyone at the table describe what they wanted the gorge to be like. First, they wrote their response and then shared with the group. Maybe you've guessed the outcome. Both sides wanted pretty much the same thing: clean environment, retention of the scenic beauty, good schools, affordable housing, health care, you know the ones. Getting people to listen to the other side to understand that they had more in common than they thought was an important first step. Kelsey emphasizes that she didn't have people start by talking about solutions. She wanted them to share a vision, which made it easier to discuss what the possible solutions would be. She says eloquently that if you can share values, you can eventually work toward solutions that seem antithetical. 40 years after the gorge was placed in a federal scenic area, the gorge is prospering, and none of the interest groups involved want any changes. In relating to others, we constantly need to check our assumptions about them. We probably can't avoid making assumptions about people, but we should recognize that we have them. I, for one, am constantly conversationally trying to figure out, whoever I'm talking to, how I can put them into a nice political box. I might ask about movies or books they've read, what they think of apartment houses, what they think of mass transit, what they think of a million subjects. Whatever the answer is, I try to put them in a little political box. I cannot tell you, when I take the time to get acquainted with those people, how wrong my assumptions are. Thank God for brother-in-laws who, through our conversations, have helped me shape this message. I talked about Gil. Clark, a local businessman, Kelsey's brother, is a classic economic conservative. While we agree on a lot of things, like the value of his sister, thanks, Kelsey, for keeping us talking and not letting our differences divide us, we disagree vigorously about many things, like economics and the future of our economy. Let me add that he's probably more knowledgeable on economics than I am. None of which is my point, however. And here let me pat myself on the back. Clark likes to talk with me because I'm not accusing him of basing his decisions on self-interest, on being a greedy business person. A guy that is employing grandchildren of his original employees is probably not basing all of his opinions on self-interest. Clark gets pissed off, probably his feelings get hurt, when people refuse to listen to him and charge that his conservative economic positions are all about saving him money. He gets upset just as we get upset. Oh, somebody, the right often says, oh, those guys, they want to encourage all those migrants coming in. They judge our humanistic impulse toward the border, thinking we do this so we can broaden our voting base. Ticks me off. I don't want to hear that. So in short, Clark and I are not in agreement on many important public policy issues. But we're learning how to talk and listen, and that builds respect. And it does something else. It piques our curiosity. Now, Guzman, the writer I cited, says that curiosity plays a large part in trying to bridge the gap between what we know and what we don't know. She asserts, and I strongly agree, that curiosity has the ability to undivide us. Why do you think that? Conversationally, it's a driving force to break down barriers. She describes the conversational process, which I think works. Assume that we've taken the risk to break out of our silo, and we're earnestly trying to engage a political opposite in conversation. If we've thought about it, maybe we have prepared a long and thorough list of questions. I want to know everything, why this person thinks that. Guzman feels, however, not to go in with a long list of questions. Let the conversation develop. You ask a question, your conversational partner responds to it, and the conversation continues. It's a conversation, not an interrogation. Have you noticed I just inadvertently switched from using the term opponent to conversational partner? That's the spirit. Maybe I am making some progress here. Kelsey reminds me to restate or to paraphrase when you're in conversation, to ask to paraphrase what your conversational partner has said so you understand, and ask them to do the same of you. Ask them if they can restate or paraphrase what you've just said. This response shows respect. It doesn't say we are agreeing, unless, of course, we have found some common ground. Responding to your partner's answers helps fill the gap between what you know and what you don't know. It not only breeds respect, but you are likely to be shocked, as I often am, about how wrong your assumptions are. To Guzman, I would add that volunteering something to your own gives your partner something to react to. When I was raising teenagers, I once asked a friend why I wasn't making more connection with them. I'm asking them questions, trying to get involved with their lives. The answer, which changed my approach to my kids, was to risk volunteering information about myself, putting something out there that they didn't know about me. Maybe we need to put something in the conversational pot to take something out of that conversational pot. I've got another suggestion for bridging this gap with folks who hold opposing views. Why don't we try letting our views of people be guided by what we know from personal experience, not by what we hear from CNN or Fox News or the New York Times or the Washington. Just let our own experience of what people are like govern our way we relate to them. Remember, many of the stories that we hear on television particularly are generated by people with a political agenda. Those stories don't just pop up. Those stories are often sold. Let's just let our view of human nature and humans come from our own experience. I like to read newspapers. In fact, when I'm asked what I'm doing now that I'm retired, I joke, I say, well, I read newspapers. And I have the luxury of reading several papers a day. So I was shocked by a study that Guzman presents that says that the more time we spend on news, the more distorted our view of the other side becomes. Because of cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias, we get our news from our own silo. The study says that those who follow the news closely have a 3 times more distorted view of the other side than people who say they only somewhat follow the news. That's true of both the left and the right. I had a psychologist tell me once that anger is always fueled by fear. Can we listen and hear the fear behind their angry protestations? Is their fear stemming from change that they don't understand, that feels threatening to them? Can we listen to them and hear our own echoes of fear stemming from changes that are happening faster than we can assimilate? As we listen to our opponents, is what we really hear hate? Or is it possible that we hear fear? If we really listen, Do we hear that our opponents really hate women? Do we really think they want poor people to starve? Do we hear that they want to abandon democracy? Are these things that we really hear? Or are they political categorizations to help us fuel our righteous indignation about folks who don't agree with us on solutions? As long as we're talking about others, the most common charge of liberals about conservatives is that they use fear as a way of othering anyone, any groups who look or sound different than us. I think all of you have heard this expression, othering. You think it's possible that we use othering as a coping mechanism? Surely not us. We like diversity. We love other ethnicities. Surely we aren't othering. It's not only possible that we do, it happens every day, and it's a basic part of human nature. Guzman explains that othering helps fortify our positions and our standing in the world. It lets us take shortcuts by quickly sorting out the good guys from the bad guys. It keeps us from hearing different points of view. We do use othering, just like the other guys do, and it steers all of us away from reality. In short, we need to understand why it's important to bridge the divide, to take steps to break out of the bubbles that we live in, and to try something radical like talking to people. We might just discover that the barriers we perceive as keeping us apart are lower than we thought. Maybe, just maybe, they aren't brown shirts after all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please stand, join me for our last hymn, number 155, Circle Round for Freedom.
Our benediction today is from British-born American broadcast journalist Ted Koppel. Aspire to decency. Practice civility toward one another. Admire and emulate ethical behavior wherever you find it. Apply a rigid standard of morality to your lives. And if periodically you fail, as you surely will, adjust your lives, not the standards. Amen, blessed be, salam alaikum, and shalom.